Welcome to the seventh circle of relationship hell, brought to you in full, hellish, disgusting, and gross out so-called humor. This is the incredible phenomenon I barely was able to finish watching. 2002, The Sweetest Thing. Now, if you're somewhere on the spectrum of socially normal, you probably were like, dude, that's a great movie. When There's Something About Mary came out, 1998, Mel Brooks, a great comedian that I love his work. It's a unique genre all its own. But Mel Brooks went on record and said about that movie being such a phenomenon, it really wasn't that great of a movie. It was just the over-the-top sex jokes and gross-out humor made it seem unique. That was, not surprisingly, right on the nose. Mel Brooks nailed it. And that sort of began an era that runs well into the 2000s that we see in a whole series of films, some of which I have not ever seen. I decided to finally see this one 4 years later, The Sweetest Thing. I'd seen clips of it, bits and pieces of it, and it's got all this great cast. It actually is, The Sweetest Thing is a perfect example of having a great and talented cast does not guarantee that you're going to make a decent movie. The story is awful. Rather, the details within the story are awful. It's one of those stories that's they are the oldest stories in the book. Boy meets girl, there's chemistry, boy and girl, boy is already going to get married to someone else. There's a whole way that this unfolds that is relatively predictable, or at least if the outcome is not, that basic setup, it is basic to human beings as far back as we made cave art. The love triangle, the unrequited love, the fear of it being unrequited, the chemistry versus the thing we already promised to do. I mean, hey, this is classic stuff. And anytime they say we're going to take a classic and put a new spin on it, that is the first warning sign. Yes, updating these stories over the ages as we tell them is important. But there's a right way and a wrong way to do it. When the story is well known to us, when it is a repetitive sort of romance story, it's in how it's told and how it's performed that it has quality. You're not really looking for anything very new. You're not looking for anything out of the ordinary except the performance. It's kind of like going to see Romeo and Juliet. Anytime between Shakespeare writing it and now, you go there expecting to see Romeo and Juliet. And even though there have been attempts to modernize it, the story's been ripped off for everything, but trying to set it in a newer time or whatever and keep the words with varying degrees of success. If you're going to go see an Elizabethan style troupe perform Romeo and Juliet, what you're looking for is not something weird or different in the plot. It is Romeo and Juliet. You're looking for how it's done, how it's performed. You're looking for the performance art. When you take one of these romantic comedy type stories, many of them ripped off from Shakespeare from generations ago, and you're updating it for a new audience, and you've got this incredibly talented cast. Jason Bateman had been around since I remember him in the Hogan Family, and you've got Cameron Diaz, Christina Applegate, Selma Blair, Tom Jane, who I didn't even recognize him at first. He would be the Punisher soon after this in one of my favorite versions of the Punisher. You've got all of these talented people, and you produce this film with crude jokes about glory holes in public restrooms and women soiling themselves and peeing in random places and pretending to engage in lesbian sex for passersby on the highway. And just like Something About Mary, which Cameron Diaz was also in, you squander the opportunity to do something really well, to do it over the top. And when you do that to that extreme, when it's gross out humor, I mean, we did not need to see that. It continues this trend from There's Something About Mary down into the 2000s through Bridesmaids that I was forced to sit through because I wasn't single at the time, and other things where you can smell it, you can hear the splatter, just the ambiance of it is gross and disgusting, revolting, and this is what takes the place of being witty or clever or smart. And for me, it's just really not funny. When we got to finally in the place in this movie where Selma Blair's character gets stuck in the act of fellatio and there's an emergency crew, I stopped it for a while. I'm I almost didn't finish it, but I paid $4 to rent it and I wanted to do a review. It is just so wretchedly bad. And it's sort of these things begin, this trend begins in this pre-woke era, and I honestly think they're kind of connected because the idea of replacing quality with spectacle, replacing story with grotesque roles and enactments, that was already beginning. And so we get now to this superfluous stuff where your entire identity as a character in the film is who you want to have sex with or what color you happen to be. It's possibly just part of this trend of draining the humanity out of the humanities and turning it into something that, frankly, Larry Flint would have been embarrassed to publish in Hustler Humor in the 1980s. That's how depraved this stuff is. And I can't blame the Hollywood stars that were always going to be looking for a role, be on the screen, and get a paycheck. I mean, absolutely. Parker Posey, Selma Blair, Cameron Diaz, Tom Jane, Christina Applegate, all of these, Jason Bateman, all of these people could have done something a lot better than what we got. But when you herd them all in, I'm sure this film made a fortune. I know that people talked about it a lot because the culture was accepting of this gross out, disgusting, over the top humor and all of these names crammed into it. It's how do you have all of this talent and you make this garbage? This is how. It starts with There's Something About Mary, and it weaves its way right down to the current time. You probably disagree with me. The majority of people do, but let me know what you think below. The Sweetest Thing. I had to pause this because this has got to be the worst movie I've seen in ages, and I don't want to finish it. I paid $4 to watch this thing. Wonder if I can get my money back.